Tell me more about yourself. It sounds like you've had a pretty eclectic life. Looking at your LinkedIn profile, you've done a pretty wide variety of stuff. How did that come about?
Are we starting? Or are this
Uh,
camera?
as far as I'm concerned, anything. Oh, actually, let me do this before we go any further, but it will apply to anything. I'm a kind of a content whore. If it sounds like something that is picked up as interesting or the
Okay,
AI Opus clip picks it up, I'll just put it in.
got
So,
it.
yeah, consider everything potentially to be included. But because
Okay.
of this, do I have your permission to record and retransmit this interview in whole and in part on social media?
Yes, that's perfectly fine. I just wanted to know when we're actually starting.
Right.
Or kind of starting.
It is pretty organic and I love it. And yet there's things I want to improve about it too.
Sure, sure. Yeah, so I mean, where did I start? How did I start? I definitely have a interesting background, I would say. My family came from Lebanon. My mom and my dad are both Lebanese. They came during the Civil War, which, that country has had its fair share of ups and downs, let's say. There's a large diaspora of Lebanese people throughout the world. There were really two major sort of exoduses, if you want to call it. One was in like the early 1900s because of like famine and different things that happened there. So Lebanese were sort of spread out to corners of the world, to the Caribbean, to Africa, Australia, to Canada, United States, so on. And some of, our most influential writers and business people came from that initial exodus. And you see that through today, where you'll find these second and third generation Lebanese where their grandparents or their great grandparents came over and now they're doing so well in business or in politics or in these different areas. So Lebanese people, have done well in general, I think, with this sort of Venetian mentality and this sort of traveler, let me go wherever I land and make something happen. That's great mentality. It's just part of their mentality, I guess. And
Mhm.
so my parents came over in the 70s and settled in Baltimore, Maryland. My dad's a physician and set up a practice there and quickly rose from being just a foreign medical graduate, like so many that came over in the 60s and 70s, to then having, the largest practice in the state of Maryland. He was an OBGYN and delivered thousands and thousands of babies and things. And that was, again, that sort of like, let's not just do it, let's do it at like a high level. Let's do that. But since a young age, I was always instilled with this idea of the world is our oyster. We're living here, but we're not necessarily from here. And we have this idea where in the house, speaking three languages from an early age was just what it was. My first language was French, followed by, I think, Arabic and then English. And it was not until probably I was 6 or 7 years old where my parents were kind of like, yeah, we're not going back for a while because things were just not stable in their home. And so, we stayed and we lived here, but it was always with this idea of there's this world out there. We're currently settled living here in the US, but the world is really where we live. And so traveling from a young age, I think I was on my first airplane at probably 4 or 5 months old, was not an uncommon thing to go see some cousins in France or in Canada or wherever the Lebanese people sort of spread out. And this influenced my mentality around what it is to be a global citizen. I talk a lot about that oftentimes, that I don't see myself as a citizen of any real country. I see myself as a citizen of the world because we're all just human beings and humanity that are somehow connected or disconnected by language. And the interesting part is when we decide to connect the dots and see beyond our own cultural norms and our own languages and things which are the barriers between us. And then we start to really just grow as a person, grow as people. Because as we
Mhm.
add these additional cultures and these additional languages and these experiences, then we become more dynamic and get closer to a sense of what it is to really be a human being. Because
Mhm.
if you think about it, all of these different countries and places and languages and cultures are facets of humanity. But the more closed off that we are in our own worlds or in our own place that we've lived, we've never left our state or never left our city, we don't see the diversity of the world. And so you understand that because you're a Canadian living in Japan, right? So you get it pretty well, I would assume. That's the point. And that reverberated through basically anything and everything that I've done up to this point, especially when it comes to global business and international business and supply chain and all these things. Because sure, I could be successful, that I'm a good business person, but that's not the reason why I believe that I'm successful in this kind of work. I think I'm successful in this kind of work because I have the ability to put myself in other people's shoes. I have the open-minded mentality to be able to give and take in conversations and not say,
Mhm.
hey, it's the way I want it to be and you have to do exactly how I say, or you are to facilitate my wishes and my goals. No, because when you do that, you stop learning. There are better ways to do it that you may not know about. There are different aspects or facets to consider that you may not have thought through. So this is where having that open-minded global mindset and global citizenship ideology comes into play, and how I think we can be very successful in business and just in life in general, right? And so this is how I sort of started with this foundation. And I was fortunate that I had that through circumstance or otherwise. Other people don't necessarily have that. The CFO of my company is from Allentown, Pennsylvania, was not very well traveled, but made a very clear-cut decision. 6'4" Caucasian guy decided at a young age that he wanted to learn languages. He wanted to see the world and get outside of the confines of where he lived and what he knew. And when we met, we didn't meet here. We met in Shanghai. He was living there. He had been studying there. He had a master's degree in finance from one of the top programs there and could speak Chinese better than the Chinese. That was an example of creating. I was through circumstance immersed in globalization and global cultures. He was through willing it to happen. And no matter how you do, I think it's all important to the way that we then choose to kind of live our lives and dictate the way that we go forward.
Nice. Okay, so I would like to ask you a question, which I will definitely be including some of that. Before we go any further, do you have any questions about the way sort of this interview goes or the destination we're heading? Because I like it to be organic and spontaneous.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, great. Said you should kind of give it directions like I prefer not to, but it's worth considering whether other people may want that. You're talking about different ways to do things.
Yeah, sometimes people do if they're trying to plug a particular, direction, a book, a this, that, and the other. I mean, we can talk about those things, but it'll be organic. It's not like this is guided towards a particular, initiative or end. So go for it, however you want to go.
Right. Okay, Kerim, thank you for coming. It's nice to meet you in screen, I guess. I got to think of one as like nice to meet you screen to screen, because we can't really say face to face, but pretty close. Could you please tell us who you are, what you do, and why we should listen to you?
Sure. My name is Kerim Kfuri, and I am the president and CEO of a company called the Atlas Network. It's a global supply chain solutions company with the goal of basically connecting the dots and helping businesses avoid expensive mistakes while still taking advantage of the global economy. This is a very, very important area to us all, especially these days in the past 5 years where the words supply chain have become common vernacular. But the reason why I do what I do outside of just the work for the businesses and so forth, and do a lot on social media and tier one media and television and so forth, is because there is no real relatable voice in the realm of supply chain. There is no person or I think really good resources to break it down for individuals or entrepreneurs or small to medium businesses who want to understand what supply chain is, because it touches each one of our lives, but can't sort of make heads or tails of it. So my goal through the things that I do socially and on podcasts and so forth is to really be able to communicate in a relatable voice what global supply chain is and why it matters to people.
Nice. I like that. And you're right. As you were speaking, I was thinking a little bit about how terribly opaque it is. It's like, look, I have my Google phone. Oh, look, I have some glasses that I got from the Hyakuen or 100 yen store. Because I have background in product development, that's sort of my first and forever love, because I've been a lifelong inventor. I've dealt with companies or negotiated with companies about licensing and things. And, obviously when you're talking about manufacturing, it's mainly about China, but it's just like, well, is there a particular place which is a stronghold for this technology or this manufacturing? But you become much more aware of it when you try to market a diversity of products or license a diversity of product ideas. It's like, well, okay, Leica, that's in Germany. Now, who really owns the optics market? Well, it's basically, of course, now Nikon. The manufacturing capabilities for chips, well, that's what is it? TSMC. Now everybody knows that. There's things coming from everywhere, but it's just like we go to the store and it's there. But what's under the hood of putting it together, especially if it's complex? Like look at a car. Most really complex things are manufactured all over the the world and then assembled in a single or multiple places in units, that's all opaque. So it is sort of esoteric, and we just assume it will always be there. And we seem to be living in an extremely unique time. When I realized that you are in the supply chain, a specialist in supply chain, it's like, this is probably the first time I've had a guest whose expertise could be informative on what's going on in terms of, isn't it the countries who export who are paying the tariffs, alienating the rest of the world? How's that going to affect not only, you said you're in the States, right?
Yes, I'm in the States and I speak a lot about tariffs and I give a lot of education around this realm because there is so much misinformation, just as you were saying, and back to this concept as to why I'm trying to take a relatable approach towards anything supply chain and all of its facets. I mean, back to what you were originally saying. I think the important thing is that knowledge is power. And without having it, you can't make any decisions, whether you are, again, an entrepreneur or an individual, a business person, or otherwise, or have the impacts of those things as a consumer. You cannot navigate or operate effectively without a certain level of understanding and information. And when it comes to global supply chain, there are these things that are controllable and there are these things that are uncontrollable. And either one of them makes sure that the things get on the shelves or not, that the widgets get on the shelves, right? So on the controllable side, you've got quality issues and you've got, manufacturing issues and timeliness and so on and so forth that really have to be controlled from a manufacturing standpoint, picking the right supplier and how do you have eyes and ears on the ground and visibility and transparency, and how do you essentially be able to make sure that it's not just that the supplier says it's good or another party says it's good, but you have audited productions where groups go in and are paid to find mistakes. They're literally paid to do that alone. So you really get unbiased sort of opinions. And this is important because if you don't do that, then products can hurt people. So you have to ensure, and also mass production can become mass disaster where you've got recalls and all kinds of other things that can happen. So these are the things that you try to control within the supply chain. And there are steps and tips and tricks to sort of do that. But then you've got all these uncontrollable things, right? Force majeure, there's a huge hurricane, there's a strike at the ports, there's a global pandemic, there's a trade conflict, a war that happens. Any of those things also can fully disrupt the supply chain from a time frame standpoint or an access to materials standpoint, where you're sourcing in the world standpoint. Either way, all of those things still have the same kinds of impacts because people can't sell the goods they need to sell. People stop buying. There's a supply and demand mechanism to this. And it ends up always filtering down to the everyday consumer and the businesses that support those everyday consumers. And that's one aspect that I don't think is always looked at or dug into deep enough, which is the consumer impact. This concept of, hey, as we have these tariffs, it's going to create inflation. This inflation is going to create a lack of buying, which is recession. And then as you do that enough, you end up getting to a place where the economy completely slows down. And that's all been because of these non-sexy words of supply chain that people need to know and understand and realize how to navigate and deal with. So I talk a lot about this in many, many different capacities.
Okay, I love that. Thank you. I have a specific question about this. I don't think this is going to come to pass because of his age, but let's imagine the current state of affairs in the US, because it's different for Canada. That's a very different experience now, and that what happened to that relationship is a tragedy, and it may never be repaired. That's a real possibility, I think. What if, given really what it is because supply chain is so strong and so opaque, and you just go to Walmart or you just go to Home Depot or you just go to whatever store you love going to, and the stuff you want is just there, despite all the stuff that happens behind the scenes to get it there. What would the US consumer market look like if you went to some of your favorite common stores, whatever that happens to be? You can pick any example you want. What would it look like if the rest of the world more or less moves on? Or, so let's split this into two. The rest of the world moves on and the US has to somehow supply or get manufactured all those things that aren't currently manufactured in the US, and or puts tariffs on them. And then take that out. Let's take that out 5 or 10 years. What would a store in the US look like after 5 or 10 years of either of those?
So in other words, if the US was cut off from global supply chain and had to service itself, you mean essentially?
That's one scenario. And project that out 5 to 10 years.
What's the other one?
And the other one is the supply chain stays in place, but there's now very high tariffs. You can base that on the reality of the current tariff prices.
Right. So if the United States has to end up, well, they're almost going to be kind of the same. And let me explain. So we know that in the United States, first of all, if we have enough runway to create our own factories and create our own manufacturing capabilities, which will take years, by the way, that may alone take 3 to 5 years. So we may eat up the timeline. And the problem is that interim time, that 3 to 5 years when things are getting built and there still aren't things that are available on the shelves and there's scarcity. And then to get your favorite thing ends up costing 10 times more because of the fact that it just isn't available in the market. Think about it in terms of like some islands and so on, where it's very difficult to get access to particular common type of product. Can the United States become a manufacturing nation again is really, I think, the big question. The answer is, I think that we can, but it will come in the next 3 to 5 or 10 years with the assistance of technology and automation and AI, because we have graduated from being a manufacturing nation mentality wise. I mean, if you go to the streets of New York and Times Square, homeless people have cell phones. So who is it that, and I don't say that in any negative way, I'm just giving an example, highlighting it, but I mean, who is going to be working in these factories? Who is going to be laboring in these places? Who wants to do it? And even in some of the far reaches of the world where manufacturing currently is, very strong and so on, even that's shifting a bit away. It's shifting more towards technology, less towards human capital and things of that nature. So could it happen? Yes, it could happen where manufacturing is happening here in the US, especially around things like the agricultural side of supply chain, where we basically, have all the ability to grow tomatoes here, avocados here in California instead of bringing them in from Mexico or other places. Sure, it may cost a bit more, but in the end of the day, we still have the resources to do it. Do we have metals in the United States to be able to do fabrication of different products? Sure, we do. Do we have oil? Yes, we have oil. Do we have manpower? Do we have resources, financial capital? We do have all of those things. But I believe where it really comes online faster is through two things happening. One, technology, and two, foreign direct investment from other countries that specialize in particular levels of manufacturing that the United States is not currently doing. So in other words, the US saying, okay, we're going to make it here, but you're going to come here and build the factories here. Whoever that come here means, whether it's the Chinese coming in or the Japanese coming in or so on. I think about in the 1980s, if you ever saw that movie Gung Ho, where basically the Japanese come in and like build a factory in like rural America. And then there's this like culture clash where the Japanese from like a place like Toyota or whatever it may be, or Nissan are working hand in hand with these factory workers from the Midwest, and they have to like come to the middle to then be able to like make product for the local market. This has happened before in our history where foreign companies will come into the US, have a presence, they have the expertise, they have the foothold, they have the technology, and they make it happen within the country. So I think through tech, US based companies can produce more US based manufacturing, and through foreign direct investment and kind of, inputs from other countries that specialize in particular manufacturing, that's how you get that online to basically satisfy the needs and demands of the consumer economy. That's how I see those years going. As far as on the tariff side, if everything sort of stays status quo, but we've just got higher tariffs in the world, well, first of all, the US government will collect a lot of money. And to date, they've already collected $108 billion. And that's a lot of money so far. And there's still a $1.2 trillion trade deficit that they're trying to bridge the gap on. So these tariffs, additional collections of these tariffs, would help with that process to then be able to potentially give a rebate back to American consumers to potentially offset the tariffs. So if we collect in enough capital, then some money could be given back. And you could see that just basically because of optics or popularity votes or viewing, that President Trump right now is actually talking about doing that, giving like a $600 relief credit to each individual in a household, which is almost like a tariff relief check, where if you're 4 people in a household, you may get like $2,400 back. So we've taken in a bunch of money to help, put down our trade deficit. Now we're going to give some back to the American public because we know things have been more expensive due to tariffs. Is it enough? Is it dollar for dollar? No, it's not. Is it an assistance measure? Yes, it could be. So that could happen. And then outside of how to actually manage the tariffs themselves, I talk about 5 ways that that's kind of done to make sure that at least the consumers don't feel as significant of an impact and things can still stay status quo. So what it is it's absorption of the tariffs, right? So who is absorbing it? Potentially part of it is the supplier, part of it may be the importer, part of it may be the brand. And then finally, when it gets to the consumer, in the end, those other entities that absorbed part of it are a little less profitable, but you haven't lost the customer and the consumer hasn't felt major impact. So let's just say you've got an extra dollar, maybe 20, 30 cents is absorbed by the supplier, 20, 30 cents is absorbed by an importer of sorts, 20, 30 cents is absorbed by, let's say, the brand itself. So everybody makes a little bit less profit, but then in the end, the consumer feels like a 5 or a 10% differential, not a dollar differential, right? They may see 5 or 10 cents, but not like a dollar fully, where the consumer has to fully absorb it. So that's an absorption technique. And some industries can't even do that. The margins are so thin that they won't even be able to absorb any of it. So it just depends product to product where that can happen. Then you have deferral of the tariffs, where people basically just delay when they ship it because of the fact that tariffs are not consistent. They seem to be shifting every few months. It's like, hey, it's 30, now it's a 90-day pause with China, and then it's back to 150%. And it's kind of like when you ship or when you bring the goods in, you put it in like a free trade zone or something like that, where it just sort of sits until you then pull the products out. When you pull the products out, then a business is then paying those tariffs, but they're able to manage that and then from a cash flow standpoint, pass it off to customers or continue to absorb it. And it just matters based on business. Third area is terms and conditions, that companies go back to their suppliers and say, here's what's going to happen. We want to keep doing business with you. We don't want to lose our customers over here. So what we need to do is that you need to give us terms and conditions that are long enough that we can pay for the tariffs as soon as the products come into the market, but not pay you for the cost of the goods yet for another 60 days or 90 days or 120 days. Let us pay these high tariffs, sell the products in the market so we can stay in business, have customers not really feel consumer impact, and then we then pay you the payments that are owed to you in arrears. We kick the can further down the road. This is a cash flow play. And that's something that has to happen from an interim standpoint so that you don't lose the customers, you don't lose the market. The factory still is doing business. They're kind of playing the role of bank or letter of credit to the supplier or the brand. And the brand basically can still stay in business because they can maintain their headcount and their distribution and their marketing and their sales and all the things that they need to do to get things in the hand of the consumer. So this terms and conditions is kind of like a third strategy. Another strategy is pricing and cost re-engineering, where the companies themselves say, hey, we always made this thing out of steel, but we need to look at aluminum now. Because if we look at aluminum, it's just as strong, it's just as flexible, but it costs 50% less. And in doing so, we can offset these tariffs because we're selling the same product, but we've cost engineered it to be a lower cost to us. Not an inferior quality, just a re-engineered product. And in doing so, they end up still keeping the market and maybe even can tout the hidden benefits. Hey, it's lighter, it's more flexible, it's all the things that you knew of the past product that we've had that you know and love for 5 or 10 years, but now it's going to be even better. They charge the same or even charge a little more, but their cost infrastructure has significantly been reduced. Now you've created a buffer to be able to manage those tariffs and still sell it for the same pricing or even less than you have historically because you've done a cost engineering exercise. You know, we know that challenge through chaos, there's opportunity. And then finally, the last thing you look at is alternative supply chains, saying, hey, we've made it here for years. They're the masters of what they do, but because of this, we're going to pick it up and we're going to move it to over here. The reasons why you don't do that so quickly is because you could move something to save $1 and cause yourself $5 in headaches. You move it over here and now nobody knows how to do it. Nobody knows how to work with the products. The materials aren't readily available. The output isn't what you need it to be. The resources, the technology, any of those things. So on its face, it's like, hey, let's go to X country because everyone's saying that that's the place to go because this country's highly tariffed. Well, you go there and you end up having something that ends up costing you 3, 4, 5 times as more. You might as well have just left it where you had it, where you had a dependable supply chain and worked through how to navigate and manage these things. So these are the conversations that I have a lot with businesses and leaders in the space around this area of tariffs. And every business to business and industry to industry will have to take a different aspect of that strategy, depending upon how their business works and how their customers work and what's the price sensitivity and the elasticity, so forth. So these things will be important to determine how you're going to manage this.
Right. I like that. Lots of things going on there. And you were talking about re-engineering things. I thought that was cool. And just the terms and conditions, obvious. But yeah, that, you know, we're old enough to know what this is. When you used to send for a product in the mail and it would come weeks later. It's like, it will be shipped to you in 6 weeks. When, of course, at that time, it was like, these guys don't know. They're actually paying for the manufacturing with their dollars. That's why it takes 6 weeks. That hasn't been done in a long time. But like you said, that might be one way it comes about. Now, something I'm going to sort of switch gears here or switch directions here, but it is related because all of these things you're talking about and are significant change. So here's a question I ask, because my podcast is normally about organizational culture and leadership, and especially because those are so enmeshed. If the leader is not going to be committed to making a better culture, you're basically screwed, because without that buy-in, it doesn't change, and oftentimes that's where it needs to change the most to go down. And something else, I've never seen Gung Ho, but when you were talking about that, it reminds me of a book I recently listened to, which was talking about one of the disastrous, I think it was the Ford plant in the US. I've heard some of the stories in books from Jim Collins and others about this. I can't remember the specific author of this book, but it was talking about bringing in Japanese people and doing Kaizen in that. The factory was not only a train wreck, but just the culture was a train wreck. Everything was a train wreck, and it was basically going to fail. And I think it may have even been that a Japanese company bought it. It may have been Toyota. And they came in and they did so much change in the culture, like the suggestion box. Those things were actually looked at by real people in decision-making levels. And then they would collaborate with them, saying, okay, here's your idea. We've actually looked at it. Now, how could we make this idea succeed? And the transformation within that real life. But it sounds very much like the plot of that movie. It's like, that's almost autobiographical in terms of an industry. So I thought that was really interesting. And it was talking about the main thing I loved about it. People are actually listening and acknowledging suggestions. Like, there's no point in having a suggestion box. It's just a joke, and it actually has a negative impact on culture. If it doesn't matter what I say, so I either don't say it or you say ridiculous things just to see if you even get a reaction, to see if anybody's even looking at them. And that's what I think it is all too often in a lot of organizations. But in this, it was like, first of all, the ideas were all looked at, and any that were like this is like, well, I kind of think you have something here. How can we make this succeed? And then it becomes a collaboration between the person who had the idea and people higher up the chain who had the ability to do stuff. But especially with the Kaizen, right? It's not only the idea of the incremental improvement, but that the frontline people, they are the real experts. Just because you're an expert as a manager, have you done the job that you're telling them we're not going to change it because it's too expensive?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that to further that leadership is only as good as the adoption of the leadership. So you can't really be a leader or lead as an organization unless the people that you're looking to lead want to take on that leadership principle that you're pushing down. And how do you bridge that gap? And the way that you bridge that gap is through what you just were saying: communication, putting yourself in their place, understanding their experiences, making sure that the suggestion box is a two-way street, right? It's not just a, hey, I'm putting this in, but that it's a collaborative effort. It's through all of those different elements that you end up being able to have transformative change within an organization. And it starts with leaders that understand that they are going to get the best impacts, not because they're sitting in the top chair and they kind of yell down to the workers and say, this is what we're doing. But it's more because they say, I understand all the challenges because I've read the suggestion box, and we're going to work on it together so that we have an adoption culture here of a leadership principle that we all believe in. And it's one that will also be able to put us from point A to point B to point C in a success pattern. Yeah, there's the leaders that have to take some definitive strategies, but it has to be based on the backbone and the experiences of those that will be actually facilitating this change. So I agree with you.
Especially in a broken culture, which there are many, unfortunately. It was like people tend to give up because they don't feel like they're being listened to, period, let alone let's see how we can succeed together and make this happen, which gives, like I said, that's investment, right? Because now it's your baby too. So of course you care more about it. And there's lots of good psychology on that. But just the fact that they're actually listening to you and showing you with their actions, not just their words, just like, great suggestions lately. Because I remember years ago, I worked at a printing manufacturer, just printing junk mail, really, sadly, but we printed your Safeway flyers. And they're like, well, we want to see all your suggestions, but they can't cost anything. We want you to give us all your effort to make money, but it can't cost any money. And we're not putting any skin in the game ourselves. And it's like, well, then why would you expect anybody who has a good suggestion to bother? What are they gaining from it? So
exactly. Yeah, it's like, why don't you give us all your intellectual capital for free? You're not going to get anything in return, but just be a good Samaritan, right? And go ahead and do that for us. It's like, just help the company out for free because you have the grace and the honor of being on our payroll. No, people don't really, in tough times, maybe. In tough times, sure. When the economy is difficult and people are dying to keep their jobs, then people will definitely go the extra mile, right? What
Right.
can I do to bend over backwards? I mean, even in scenarios of things like unpaid internships and things of that nature, why do people show up? They're showing up because of the promise of something, the promise
Yes.
of a full-time job or whatever else it is. But if there isn't even that, like, hey, give us your suggestions, and because of it, we're going to end up looking to put you into some kind of a leadership committee, or we're going to look to help you be a part of this sort of scenario to roll it out. Make at least, if you're not paying somebody something, let them feel important about it.
Right.
Why it matters. Hey, we are selecting yours of many because of the fact that we value your ideas, and we'll put you up as. That's what I thought that was really very genius of places like supermarkets or other places where you walk in and you have the picture of the person on the wall and says employee of the month.
Hmm.
Nobody's getting paid to do that. They basically are just saying, hey, work really hard and maybe you can have your picture on this wall and be recognized as an employee of the month. It costs the company nothing, but the productivity level rises.
Hmm.
Again, so if you're not paying somebody for these ideas and thoughts, then at least be able to give them something that is a level of recognition or something that they can feel, that they're part of something larger.
Yeah. So, and this leads to the question that came off of when you were talking about these different supply chain changes or strategies that may be necessary or may be coming. It was like, well, that's going to make a lot of change and that's going to make a lot of cultural change. So this question fits very nicely in that one. That is, what questions should we be asking ourselves about transforming organizational culture and leadership?
What kind of should we, given the current, what's happening currently?
It's open. It's like, I'll just repeat it one more time, but yeah, it can have whatever context. It's sort of like saying, what kind of ice cream do you like? Not just vanilla, strawberry, or chocolate.
Sure.
You decide how to answer it. So I'll ask one more time so it's clear and fresh. And that is, what questions should we be asking ourselves about transforming organizational culture and leadership?
The first question is are we doing enough? And what do I mean by that? In order to really be dynamic and shifting at all times, and therefore being nimble and agile as companies and organizations, we need to consistently be asking, are we doing enough with regards to developing culture and other opportunities within the organization? And so now that we've understood that there's a basic thread that we want to pull on or think about, the next step to that is, what are the processes to do so, right? So let's just say that we really want to focus in on culture, or we want to focus in on other kinds of advantageous opportunities. Similar to what we were discussing before, what's the mechanism by which we determine what the current culture is? What's the mechanism that we determine what our colleagues or potentially even competitors in the industry are doing that's different, better, worse than what we do? How do we then choose to bridge that gap and that divide, right? So if it's from the inside out, it's a conversation of, what do our current people think about the way the culture is? What would they like to see? How could it be different? How could we change things? And working, as we discussed before, in a collaborative mechanism to figure out how to do that. If it's from the outside in, it's a scenario of, again, looking at other organizations or companies, either in our country or out of our country, and looking to adopt the best practices or principles, turn those into processes, and then put them into action, while all along the way having a phased-in approach. Because what you can't do when it comes to things like cultural shifts and dynamics like that is just go black or white. Because you've got people, individuals, and so on, who have been a part of an organization for maybe decades and things of that nature, and are not as responsive or receptive to change as others may be. You even have differences in generations, right? Current generation coming in versus someone like myself who's, 30, 40 years more senior. And we have different mentalities and wavelengths on what we think is important and how we determine what is the best way and practice forward. So it's a matter of looking at identifying the cultural opportunities, creating some processes, having it be as collaborative as you can be, and then phasing it in to see the receptiveness and the acceptance and the advantages of making such a shift while it's getting phased in. And if it's not working, being smart enough, adaptable, agile enough to say, you know what, the vast majority of people don't like this, or it's not working in the way that it was intended. Let's continue to throw another dart at the dartboard to see if we have something else that's going to stick better. This is the way I think it should be looked at, from the inside out, the outside in, developing of processes, phasing in these kinds of changes to then ultimately get at what will be true change that's universally adopted, or not universally, but at least majority adopted. You'll never have universally adopted.
Yeah, I like that. And you hit on an important point there, because my background is neuroscience, so it sort of informs what I do. I come from that perspective, and it's not surprising, and it isn't just based on age. It gets more entrenched with age. That is more about continuing to do something in a certain way for a long longer period of time. That's literally the neuroplastic changes in your brain. That's the way we do it. So changing them is going to be harder. And our brain,
or scary,
usually scary as well, because,
right.
People don't like to, it's interesting, as an English teacher here in Japan, people who, especially people who are accomplished, aren't necessarily fond of feeling incompetent or incapable or less capable than people many years their junior with far less knowledge. When they're accustomed to being the big dog, sometimes it is extra challenging. I actually had one case, was great. It was a very high level room. So these people were sort of daily reporting to the CEO or up of that level. Some were lower, but a lot of them were fairly high level in the organization. Only because it was a very progressive organization for Japan was I able to say, okay, this probably senior person in the room, they have to work harder at their English, because what it was basically a national authority, maybe even an international authority in what they did, and they were really good, and they were the boss of several people in the room, but they were, let's say, 10 or 15 years older than myself. I'm 58, but this was years ago now. But anyway, so they were probably in their 60s somewhere, very senior and male in a very patriarchal and traditional society. But fortunately, he also was sort of talkative and playful. But it was amazing because I was able to communicate through people that he answered to that he needs to put in more work, and that I was going to not put him on the spot, but be quite insistent. None of this, oh, that's okay, I'm senior. You talk to the younger people. They already know how to do that. It's like, no, you have to do this too. So it's interesting, and it's what you were talking about. So people are naturally resistant to change because in evolutionary terms, what you did up to today has not killed you. So when you want to talk about when things were dangerous, it's the reason there's so much anxiety in that. We have the same 28,000-year-old responses that haven't really changed, because remember, when our brains and our bodies as they are now, it does take apparently something like that 20 or 28,000 years for significant change to happen in behavior on the level of structure. So as far as our brains go, it's like this is a dangerous world where animals can eat you or robbers can kill you and so on. So anything that's different than what has kept you alive to this point, especially if it's been for a long time, is definitely naturally more of a threat, and also takes a lot more mental energy, literally more cognitive load, because it's like now I have to go back to being incompetent or learning something as though I were a child, even though I'm senior most in the organization and everybody comes to me for my expertise. So you've got both of those, sort of the threat of being incompetent or being a beginner's mind again, plus the fact that the energy it takes, anything that steals energy in the world 28,000 years ago could be the difference between living long enough to reproduce or dying. Therefore, our brain likes to save energy, and our brain doesn't like change, especially because of those reasons. It's like change might kill me, and using extra energy might also kill me. So I'm not enthusiastic about either of those. That's natural, and that's across generations. That isn't.
Yeah, and I think that it goes a little bit deeper than that within organizations where people even create what I would call a cocoon. And they're like, all right, this chair, this desk, the way I come in every day and I drink that coffee from that machine and I have that conversation with Tom or Betty or John or whatever else it is, that is my cocoon. And anything that disrupts this cocoon, I've dedicated 20, 30 years of my life to it, basically is a threat. So it's not even about a threat of being eaten or any of these other things that are more extreme. It's a threat to this simple idea of how their being is and how they're going to show up every day and what environment they're going to look to act, react. And when there's a disruption to that, and the older you get, the scarier it becomes, because you say, hey, you know what? If I lose this job or I lose this cocoon, am I still desirable in the market? Am I too old? Do I not have the skill sets? Has the blade become dull? It's not sharp anymore because I've been here for so long doing the same kind of thing in and out without enough motivation or changes and so on. And so people get afraid of the cocoon situation and that they have become irrelevant. And that's the whole conversation around AI today. People are afraid about them becoming absolutely irrelevant because it will disrupt the cocoon of what they're used to doing. And yes, if you have that mentality and you just wait for the tidal wave to show up and the tsunami's coming and you just stand there saying, oh, I don't know, I don't have a life vest or anything like that to help me out or whatever, then you're going to have a real challenge. But when you look at AI, if you look at it and say, this is could be one of the greatest. It could also be one of the worst, but could be one of the greatest innovations we've ever seen in human history. How am I a part of it? How am I going to look to adopt certain things that will advance my society, my career, and so on and so forth in ways that could have never been done? Then in that way, we're living in a time machine because we get the chance to live in the future because the machine is going to do things that we as human beings would have taken 5 or 10 or 20 years to achieve, especially in the realm of things like medical research, where we're able to put in parameters and things and be able to spit things out that would have taken literally 10 years or 20 years to develop. That's time travel. We literally are seeing time travel because we're like, okay, now we have the information now. So what do we do with it now that we have it? Maybe we're not even ready for it. We may have the information way before we as a society are even ready to hear it. Imagine someone comes out and says, this thing that we've all been eating, I'm not going to say a thing because then people will freak out, but this thing that we've all been eating, whatever else it is, absolutely causes cancer. We didn't know. Thousands of years, we had no idea, but the computer figured it out. What's going to happen? No one's going to see it on the supermarket shelves, and no one's going to, whatever it may be. You see? So it's that kind of knowledge that today could transform the way that we live in certain ways. And so back to the conversation about not living in the cocoon, we need to look at these alterations or disruptions or changes or new technological advances as opportunities for us to do what we do better, not necessarily to say that this is going to replace what I do and I will become an irrelevant person. And that's a mentality shift. That's a shift in your mind. And that comes from leadership. That comes from top down saying, we're bringing in these new things not to replace you. We're bringing these new things that a better way to do what you do, or that you're not going to do what you do anymore. You're going to do these other things and it's going to be that much greater because it's like what you used to do, except at a much higher magnitude. And then you show the whole thing back to that employee of the month idea that it's like, okay, well, you're basically like having a much higher level of responsibility and visibility because you were willing to adapt and shift in a degree. So there's interesting things coming about. But yeah, this mentality thing is important for culture shift too.
Yeah, I got a couple of things from what you said, and I'm going to start with habit because it was what you were talking about, doing the same things over and over. That's actually very desirable. That is, it again saves energy in our brain. We do things a certain way. It's very desirable and it's very efficient in what our brain prefers, but it is also the reason, as you said, people resist change. And I like your word cocoon, by the way. I think that's pretty cool. So it makes people uncomfortable because they can't stay in their cocoon, but it is also the means of how to shift it. That is developing new routines with new repetitions that are meaningful and effortful to do that rewiring. And I like some of your reframes about the AI. I have mixed feelings about AI right now because I've listened to enough books on it by experts. And I think it's funny because, everybody and their dog who's read one book, or I doubt even read one book, you see online are positioning themselves as some kind of AI authority as like, you don't know very much about AI. And I don't claim to know very much about AI. I just listened to books by people who did. And my latest experience with AI that left me most underwhelmed is ChatGPT. I paid for the GPT-4 last month or the month before I gave up. It gave me some great ideas, and I'm an inventor in these projects and, a success app, an app based on the psychology and habits and many, many, many things, all these cool layers. But the AI said all the things it could do. And after like 3 or 4 months, it was like literally I had to pin it down like an incompetent or dishonest employee. Exactly how many of these projects that you said we could do that you were able to accomplish X, Y, and Z are done. And so this was like 5 or 6 projects with lots of layers. And more than anything, the AI was really good for brainstorming, but it was literally incapable of moving forward on any of the projects. It's like, this product, assessing it as any other product rather than AI with all its sexiness, it's not up to standard to accomplish what I need it to do. So why would I pay for a product that is fundamentally on some level sufficiently defective or sufficiently incompetent at the things it says it can do? Great for brainstorming, but like even just doing dice, like word, literally dice. I got some here. Oh, here we go. Just doing different dice with words and doing things like that. So not just games for kids, but for learning things about language. Okay, I have two of them here. And after, designing things around real language models by Fashion, he's a linguist and authority on language acquisition and that. I have these dice that I made, this die and this die, right? Cool. But after months of trying to get the AI to make dice, which then you could just use the permutations of a set of, say, 8 dice to make a massive number of sentences, and then use that to help people learn not only high frequency words, but make an incredible number of sentences. And the main object of it would be, as a game, to roll all the dice and then, like Scrabble, but sentence Scrabble in a way, put them together in the correct order to make a correct sentence. And there would be, of course, massive permutations on them. And it utterly failed to even draw a singular die net, that is the flattened pattern of the dice, or put them on. It says, I'm working on that, I'll do it. And then like weeks later, it's like, where are you? Oh, we're on stage 3 of Krashen's 22 stages. It's like, but several weeks ago, you were on stage 6. What happened? So I find it really interesting. There's amazing things happening with AI. In particular, when you were talking about sort of novel things, it was the age of AI, Henry Kissinger and other authors. And it was talking about a model, because, there's these protein folding models and everything else that are doing some amazing things, AlphaGo and AlphaGo Zero. But this one had actually come up with a novel model of pharmacology and produced Halcyon. That's an homage to, HAL 2000 from 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yes.
One of those. Right. It was an homage to that, but it was a novel antibiotic. And the model upon which it was based was completely derived from AI. No human had ever approached the idea of pharmacology from that. So it has both, but right now, at least my amateur but experienced opinion is this. The AGI is mostly bullshit at our current level. That is, even the chatbots aren't doing nearly as much as they sell them to do, as they want us to pay for them to do. In my own direct experience, it's like 5 unfinished projects after months. It was like, screw it. It's not delivering on the goods. Now, if this was any other employee, I'd have to fire their asses, right? If they didn't do it, it's like, I don't care how much you're struggling. If I can help you become better at it and you can deliver on it, but there's some point at which you have to say, okay, you're not capable of doing this. And that's essentially what happened. So I fired ChatGPT and will for the foreseeable future. Yet the specialist systems, that's what's doing the amazing things. But of course, it is very narrow.
Yeah, no, I understand. I mean, and it's part of it is going to be a matter of data, right? That it just needs to keep being fed so that it becomes better and better and better. But my bigger issue really comes with regards to creative thought. The brainstorming side that you said, for maybe people that look at it in just a additive function could be helpful. But my problem is that we have generations today that are not thinking at all. They basically are just like, hey, I just don't have to think, because back to this idea of letting our brain save energy. Well, guess what? Our brain saving energy these days equates to our not using our brain. That's what it's equated to. And I look at things like my son, who's basically in high school, who when he's doing a math problem just points his phone at the math problem and AI tells him how to do it. And I'm like, great. So you learned nothing. Oh no, but then I go back and I review how to do blah, blah, blah. No, you didn't. No, you didn't. You basically didn't. Your brain synapses did not go through the process of actually looking at this problem, thinking through what you had learned fundamentally, applying it, how to figure out A and B and C, to know what's correct, what's incorrect, how to do it, solve it, go back, fact check it, make sure it was correct. That whole sequence never happened. And because that sequence never happened, not only did you not learn anything, but you can't apply it to any other scenario where you encounter something that's similar, somewhat the same, or completely different. All you did was pointed at something and saw a way that it gave you the answer in that very specific confined box and opportunity, and that has no transitional opportunity whatsoever. So this is the way that AI is being used, I think, is extremely damaging, that people are losing their ability to think entirely for this idea of, hey, if I don't have to spend so much time doing this, then I can spend more time mindlessly looking at Instagram or whatever, right? And this is the real challenge I find with AI, that I believe that on one end, we're going to be informationally smarter because we have so much robust knowledge that's coming at us all the time in 5 and 10-second intervals, where you can see the world, learn about a billion things in 5 seconds, push a button on Google, you know everything. So we've got a ton more sort of data, but how much knowledge do we actually have? How much understanding? How much learning do we have? We got a lot of data, got a lot of facts, got a lot of things that we've got going on in our brain, but what have we actually learned? And we see this with its then transitional impact on human behavior. How many times you go into a restaurant and you see a father, a mother, a son, a daughter, they're sitting at the table, no one's talking to each other. Everybody's on their phone. It's become common practice. It's the worst thing ever. It's the breakdown of civilization. We're going to come to a place, ultimately, if this continues and continues in the way that it is, where we would probably have spoken more to each other as cavemen, when we probably didn't even have language, right? We had symbols and this and the other, and we would grunt than we do today. I'm serious.
I agree with you.
Backwards with all of this.
Yeah, we are. And it's interesting because Jonathan Haidt is a moral psychologist, and he did a book called The Anxious Generation, specifically directing at especially Gen Z, but just in general. But I notice it myself because it is social media has used the behavioral algorithms of intermittent reinforcement, intermittent variable reinforcement. You're going to get a reward. You don't know when and you don't know how much, but it's going to come, and that extinguishes slower than anything. So if you always praise your kids, it's actually far from ideal. You'd be better to variably praise your kids, that is, in an unpredictable pattern and to unpredictable degrees, is the thing that will give them, they will do maximum effort, right? Whether it's a mouse or a cockroach or a human. And the social media companies in particular know this and leverage it. I even see it in myself. Okay, well, I just wasted an hour of my time. I kind of sort of enjoyed it, but not really. And I recognize it's like, okay, that's an hour of my time. I'm going to stop because this is ridiculous. But even as somebody who knows the background of what the mechanisms they use, it doesn't mean that I'm immune to it. And what you're talking about, Jonathan Haidt talks about specifically that. And there are places, I think Australia just said that anyone below 16 won't be allowed to use most social media accounts. That is for Facebook and whatever it is, all the different social media platforms. They will not be permitted to allow anybody on that platform for Australia. Their presence there will be contingent on them rejecting people under, I think it was 16, which is about where Jonathan Haidt puts it, saying that the addiction thing or the screen mindlessness and the social and neurological damage it probably is causing. Yeah, he's saying we probably shouldn't let any kids under 16 use phones.
Yeah, I agree in so many ways. And, here in New York, the mayor has said that no phones are allowed in school at all. Like basically you come in, you put your phone in this plastic container thing, and that's it. You can't touch it the whole day. And they're passing these rules and regulations around this here. And I find it to be extremely refreshing and good, because what's the purpose? You're there in school to actually learn, and it's not to be on your phone all the time. And at the same time, too, the challenges extend well beyond what happens in school, where parents need to take the same kind of mentality, too. I mean, this concept of screen time, this idea of curbing the amount of hours that you can use it, not use it. I mean, there are kids today that are having, outside of emotional issues regarding phone usage and cyberbullying and all this kind of stuff, actual physical problems where they have stenosis in their neck, crane neck from this all the time, right? Where their necks crack and pop. I'm talking about at 12 and 13 years old. People that are having like neck issues, carpal tunnel in their hands, and all these things that children should not have. And so, these are real challenges. They're going to get worked through. Unfortunately, I think in many ways, there's going to be higher levels of tech. There's going to be chips. There's going to be went to the phones, and it's going to be projections, and it's not even going to be a device anymore. And anywhere you go, just push a button and your device shows up on a wall, and you can just kind of, type on nothing. They're going to come up with things to just keep producing more and more convenient tech without the devices. The key, though, is to really be able to make that balancing act, get the kids out to nature, take them camping, go swimming, do things that are part of our planet that we can enjoy while we still have this planet, and really just be able to make as much of a balancing act as we can. So I think it's important with technology to see it for its advantages, but at the same time, what are we losing in the process? Our ability to think, our ability to speak, our ability to, these are things that are really important that have to be looked at too.
Right. And I like that you talked about it on the parental level, because that's what he argues, but it's just generally true. Of course, it's not that you can prevent them from using these things all the time, and nor should you, but it's also a matter of understanding when they are useful and beneficial versus harmful and counterproductive, because that's really what it is. And I'm not a parent, but I've taught many young kids, you can see the difference and you can get some sense of how they're parented by how they behave in class or how they interact, not only with each other, but with a teacher. And some people, there's always this thing about, oh, well, lots of teachers aren't any good. Well, I'm sorry, but the truth is a lot of parents suck at being parents. If they're just giving a screen and thinking that's parenting, it isn't. And you are right on so many things about, again, not just the physical things, but the neurological things. That is, our brains are shaped by what we do repeatedly. And one of the things that's fundamental, one of my big things I say to all my language students, but students, period, I'm all over social media myself. I'm on 6 platforms via Opus Clip. I'm leveraging AI in the way I think it's actually beneficial. But I always say to my students, understand, don't memorize.
Yep.
We've been skipping that loop with the phone where it's like, why should I memorize anything? Well, you shouldn't memorize it, but if you don't understand it, your math example is perfect. If there is not an engagement of effort, that is effortful thinking, of struggle, that is one of the physiological underpinnings of how our brain becomes stronger, how our intelligence and our thought process and social skills happen, is by doing it. It's very much like a muscle in that you don't get strong muscles by laying on the couch. You get strong muscles or a good cardiovascular system by doing something that makes you breathe hard or makes your muscles tired. Our brain is the same thing. And if it's not there, then that development, the fitness of those things is impaired.
Yeah, it's not about finding the answer. It's about mastering the concept. And that's the key. And that's where I think that, unfortunately, because we're in such an age of convenience, where we want to push a button and have 1,000 things come to our doorstep, that we lose sight of this idea that it's not about just finding the answer. It goes back to, what is it, Frost, where he basically says the fork in the road and I took the one less traveled and it made all the difference. Mm-hmm. That's the idea there, Robert Frost, because the journey is what we learn from. The mistakes that we made, the fact that we had to struggle to learn it and then came out to then finally understand it. It wasn't that somebody just put it right directly in front of us and said 1 + 1 = 2. It's like, here's what 1 means. Here's what 2 means. Here's what addition means. And there's an equal symbol. And in the end, when these 2 units come together, you have a combination that then becomes more than the sum of each, right? And we end up coming to this ideology very simplistically. But if you don't understand what the number 1 is, or what that little plus sign means, and so on and so forth, and someone just shows it to you, what have you learned? Nothing. You've learned pictures on a screen that mean nothing.
Well, you've learned mastery of one thing. Your son maybe has a PhD in phone pointing. Unfortunately, so does everybody else. It's like, right. And
you know, I'm gonna not throw my son necessarily under the bus, because the reality of it is he's a very, very good student. He does very well. But the point is that they fall into that trap because so many of the other kids do too. And there's these moments, like, I've never seen it before. I mean, my kids, for example, have a test every single day. I don't know how you learn anything when you have a test every day. You don't learn anything. And there's the time horizon so short to be able to learn anything when all you're doing is being tested all the time. So you end up defaulting to what? To just quick memorization, because your brain tries to go to that simplistic state, like you said. And so, in between what they have with their sports and their other curricular activities and this and the other, and got to be with friends and social media, make sure that you want to be here and there, and you got to know where everybody is at all times, blah, blah, blah. When do they go outside and just, here's a stick, go play? Use your imagination. There's a simplicity and a beauty to being bored. Learn how to be bored without anything in your hands except for maybe a book or nothing. Learn how to just ponder. Sit down there and actually think about, wow, that bird flew by. This grass sure is growing slow, or whatever you want to think about. But use your brain to navigate the world around you, not just to see what's directly in front of you and be fed. And there's a simple beauty to that I think that the current generation has yet to find. And that's, like, for example, why we go camping every single summer. And the most beautiful thing about us going camping every single summer, what do you think the most beautiful thing is about us going camping every summer? Tim, can you take a guess? What's the most
I'm just going to guess that they realize that it's actually pretty cool to be mindfully in nature and that they can actually enjoy themselves doing something else.
Yes, but what's the catalyst of what you just said? It's very specific. Can you guess what the one thing is that makes that all possible?
From what you were saying, I'm just going to guess mindfulness. I'm not really sure, but that's the thing that comes to me.
I'll tell you what it is. No cell service.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
There's no phone service. So
didn't even think about it. It was like, of course there's no phone service.
But no, because even if you were in the beauty of nature and all that kind of stuff, and there was phone service, believe me, they'd find a way to hide out in their tent. They'd find a way to do something else and be here. But because this place that we go to, because of terrible phone reception, there's no phone service for 2-3 days. So what do? They figure out how to use their brain and do everything else. It's literally a godsend. There's no phone service, so they're in the lake. They're doing the thing. What stick are we going to pick up? Where are we going to run? Let's make food. Let's do this. Let's do that. It's simply because of that one thing. And I swear to God, when you see that as a parent, that you see your kids being kids, it's like, first of all, you feel sad about it because you say to yourself, I can't believe that they don't live this way every day.
Right.
That's the first thing. And then the second thing is like, well, I'm happy that they're actually experiencing it for however long they are.
Yeah.
And it's a really interesting dynamic. But that specific point where there's no reception sometimes is so liberating. I lost my phone in a cab in New York last year. I had the biggest smile on my face you would ever imagine. Everybody couldn't even imagine, like, oh my God, your company and what you're doing and running and doing things. How are you going to know? I was like smiling ear to ear for like a few hours. Then some reality set in that I was like, all right, unfortunately, I need this thing. And because kids and this, that, and the other, and who's going to be where, just to even make a phone call, let's call for any other reason beyond. But I was very, very happy to be detached from technology for a while with no lifeline, if you want to call it. But, so, I mean, we just need to find that balancing act, I think. For us, for the generations to come, the way we work, the way we operate in these organizations, it's all important.
Yeah, I agree. And the reason I missed that answer, it was like, because it was self-evident that there wouldn't be that. It's sort of like, for example, right? And I like the fact that you use the phone. It's like way back in the olden days, phones were attached to walls and you had this thing that rotated when you wanted to phone somebody. It's like, right? So it's hilarious how we lose context, even as people who lived through that era, we even lose context when we're in it. And that's one of the reasons you were talking about. Everybody is susceptible because it's hijacking deep evolutionary things. That's why it doesn't matter how much I know about the brain or about psychology or about what the social media companies are doing. It doesn't mean I'm not susceptible. So of course, people who are younger, who have never known anything different, are as susceptible or more susceptible. And that is the only thing. If we allow them, for the most part, and tell me if I'm wrong, but that's all they would do.
Correct.
It's been designed that way.
It's all they would do, and they would atrophy physically and mentally. They would just become nothing. They would have be no neck, hands, like carpal tunnel. All they would do is just eat and surf. And it's really unbelievable. And this is where the role of the parenting is super important, because parents can't assume that the schools are going to raise them. And parents need to also, outside of that, need to create the dynamic environments to work the social aspects, the technological aspects, the health aspects, the enjoying nature aspects, all of these things. That's what it means to be a parent today, to do those balancing acts to ensure that where there are those landmines, you can move them and you can make your kids aware of what those are as landmines, and at the same time be able to provide unique dynamic opportunities that are not necessarily high cost or anything else. It's just like, hey, I'm taking your phone for the next 24 hours. I'm not doing it because I don't love you. I'm doing it because I do love you. I want you to go out there and I want you to just enjoy nature or do whatever we're going to do on this thing, and just be a part of the world for a little bit. And that is the first step, is looking up, look around, Yeah.
There's this whole other place where all of humanity has lived for, the 100,000 years or so as species have existed. What you're looking at is a new phenomenon. It actually reminds me of an interesting experience because it's not specifically related to this, but kind of related in terms of a remarkable experience most people alive have never had that I have. But you have to be there. You have to do something physically to make that happen. So I have these big wheeled skates, like 30 centimeter wheels, 1 foot wheels. And I wanted to actually record a video of me skating with my poles, so carbon poles and these skates through this really cool tunnel. I later learned what it actually is it's the top of a mountain in a place called Takarazuka near where I live, probably 20 kilometers away. And it's actually at the top of this mountain. The reason there's this cool tunnel with these vines growing over it is that's a golf ball net, because on both sides, just out of view of this isolated mountaintop road is golf greens. So it's literally, there could be stray balls that would otherwise hit cars. So they put this net up. And I used to leave to go do this shooting. I had to do it at like 4:35, 6 in the morning. So I would leave at midnight on my bike, and I'm talking a pedal bike, not a motorcycle, go up there, and it would take me like 3 or 4 hours to get there. And one day I went through this tunnel and out this bridge, and the sun was just rising. It's this big sort of valley. I am the only human being anywhere to be seen. And I heard hundreds of thousands or millions of birds waking up and singing all at once in a completely isolated valley. You can't have that experience unless you're somewhere in the world. And especially, like I said, I'm maybe one of very few human beings who have ever heard that sound. And it was
you were there at that time in that specific place, and you were disconnected from anything else. Another experience I would say that's very similar to that, and another reason why I think it's very important for us to get out into nature and experience it in different ways is I like to go diving, and I take my son with me diving. And when you're down there, there's no cell phones, and all you're doing is you are there to observe. That's what you're there to do. Don't touch anything. You're down there, you're diving, you don't touch things. You just observe. And again, this scenario of just pure curiosity. We're going to the bottom of the ocean to basically swim among these underwater mountains, see creatures that you would never really see, and just be a part of an ecosystem that we are not fully exposed to all of the time because we're not supposed to be down there like that. And there's no technology with us down there. How amazing. Like how amazing. And those are the kinds of things that I think are really, really important. But that comes from the parenting side. If parents are just going to say, here you go, kid, have fun, knock yourself out, where is their development, in the growth and mentality and everything else? And that flows through to not just children and parents, it flows through to organization. It flows through to companies. It flows through to this transformative culture side of things where it's like you are more than just your ability to show up. You are more
and make us profit. Yeah.
Exactly. You can be a part of something bigger, but real leaders understand that. Real leaders create mechanisms and constructs to support that kind of mentality. Back to that employee of the month idea. That is all about, it's about improved productivity, but at the same time, it's really about sort of like heralding good achievements of people within an organization that quote unquote cares.
And it has to be meaningful and significant though, too, right? Like if nobody cares, it's like, yeah, whatever. It has to have sufficient ritual or importance culturally within that organization. Otherwise, it's like, yeah, whatever. Even maybe an insult or people striving not to get employee of the month, and you get like a counterculture to it where people are trying to avoid going above and beyond versus saying, I feel like I've done something that mattered because it's important, and it's important in this culture. And again, it all rolls downhill, good or bad.
And that's all about framing. It has to be framed as something that people want to achieve, as opposed to being like, oh, that's a hokey thing, and I'd rather that my picture isn't on that wall. You get, like you said, that the cool aspect is to not get on the wall, whatever. So
cool kids. Yeah. Well, and that's a matter of, I think most organizations, if they have too much of that kind of thing, it always starts at the top as far as I'm concerned. It's a failure of leadership, but it's also a failure of HR, which is don't hire people who are going to create a negative influence. And if you do, you got to get rid of them. You can't hesitate. If somebody is there who is too cool for school or, takes pride in low standards, anybody who sees that person there goes, well, why am I trying hard? They don't get fired for being this way. So, you have to be willing to, first of all, prevent that person getting in your door. And secondly, remove that person if they're not a good culture fit. It's like, well, we are about excellence and doing well. And it's not just about profit, but it is about that excellence and doing well. And this isn't the place for you if you don't like that. I've got a question that fits really well with what I think you said, and it just happens to be next. And this is all of the question. I'm not going to bias you as to how you answer this. This is why I love this question. Teach, learn, practice, or solve?
I'm going to say learn.
Okay. Why did you choose that one?
Because we have to consistently be learning, because it's only through learning that you're able to do the other three. Through your learnings and understanding that you're able to put things in practice. And it's also through your learnings that you're able to then be able to do something else outside of teach, which is also to solve problems for others and things of that nature. So we are the embodiment of our experiences that teach us, or, that we get learnings from, that then allow us to then take those experiences and those opportunities that we've had in our life, good, bad, and otherwise, and then project it back into the world as a teacher of others, or a parent, which is also a teacher of sorts, to be able to put things in practice in our business world because we've had this 20 or 30 years of experience in this industry or doing that thing or being in these places and so on, or then being able to solve problems for others like I do in global supply chain because I've been in those trenches. I've learned those hard mistakes so that my clients don't have to go through those baptismal fires that we already did 10, 20 years ago or however many years ago. So I think of all of the four, it's for me, if I was to pick one, I know you didn't say pick one, you just threw them out there. I would
Right.
say learn because that would be the foundation and basis for the other three.
Nice, nice. And that's why I just left it when I first sort of conceived of this question. It was like, no, that's all I need because they might think, prioritize. They might think pick two or anything else. Which ones can you ignore? And by leaving it that open and that vague, that's what I want. A Rorschach style question. It was like, you determine how to answer this. Now I have another one, and
How many people picked what I said?
it's pretty broadly distributed.
Okay. Did anybody say it in a way like I said it though?
Maybe not specifically, and I liked it because I also am a perpetual student. I probably listen to probably a book a week, a little less because I'm not traveling as much now. But I'm always learning something new. It's just who I am, so I can totally relate to it. Yeah, I don't think anybody said learn because here's what I put down sort of for my own notes from what you said, and that was learn because it's foundational to all the others.
Correct.
Right. And so, yeah, nobody specifically has answered it in that way. I think people have picked every answer. Like for me, solve. It was like, well, I'm an inventor. It's about solving problems. I don't even remember anymore because I've heard too many of them.
Right.
I can't unknow what I've been trying from other people. So what would mine be? I don't know. I would have to go back in time and not have invented the question. So here's another one, but this is much more specific instruction. I'm creating organizational culture building activities. So what question, activity, or game mechanic is a must for an organizational culture or leadership game?
The ability for everyone in the game to have an equal platform or voice to explain their position, their thought, their strategy, or their reasoning behind why they either took a certain move or made a certain decision in the game, and that it's in a public forum. Because I think that it's only through that exchange in a public forum that everybody there ends up hearing everybody else out, which is that idea of the equal voice. And then from that, be able to then make determinations on what happens next. So I think you need to create some kind of a mechanism where it's everybody gets sort of like equal footing and everybody, is able to present or put forward their position fairly and equally so that in the end, people can either learn from each other or improve each other, grow each other, and so forth.
Excellent. So I'm going to read you something back because especially with a question like this, I want to make sure I understand the essence and that if the essence hasn't been captured, of course, I'm just going to put what you said as part of the content, but do I understand what you mean? Of course, that involves the interview too, for everyone to have equal ability and voice for whatever is being expressed, discussed, or addressed.
Let's tighten it up. I would say that, let's put it in a different way. The game should ensure that the players all are on equal footing from the beginning of the game, that no one has an advantage over each other, and that as the game progresses, that each individual or each player has an equal ability to present their opinions or their moves in the game that make them either successful or fail during the game. Because that is how we get to a place of even cultural exchange. Not to say that this person started off 3 steps down the road, so therefore they're in an advantageous position, or to say this person can't express their voice or make this move because the fact that they failed in these other ways. So at a consistent frequency that everyone is on an equal playing field. Now, how you, let's say, win or lose that game and which player ends up winning or losing the game, if the game is about winning or losing, is something that would have to be determined. Is there like an impartial judge? Is there something else, like another mechanism in place to do that? But if it's not about that, if it's about who tells the best story or Pictionary, who draws the best, it just depends upon how the game is played. But more than anything else, to really have the proper sort of cultural exchange, all players need to feel like they're on equal footing, and all players need to feel as though they have an equal voice at all points during the game.
Thank you. Let me iterate back to how I've changed my sentence based on what you just said. That everyone is on equal footing and has an equal voice from beginning to end.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, great. And when you first said it, the first thing that came came to my mind because this is literally the essence of it: psychological safety. That the top performing teams, the original research was done by Amy Edmondson, but actually there was people before her, but she's like a modern guru of psychological safety. And what Google did, there was something called Project Aristotle. And essentially what it said is, we found that our top performing teams at this company full of brilliant people, the one variable that seems to best predict the performance of a team is psychological safety. And that's what I get from this. It's like, okay, it doesn't matter whether you're the boss, whether you started yesterday, if you can be made to feel in the actions of the company, if it is that everybody has the ability to agree, disagree, admit their ignorance and everything else, and that it's safe to do so, the best results come from that version, which is in essence psychological safety.
Yeah, because it's freedom.
Yeah.
It's freedom. And that's a big part of being able to have those exchanges, those cultural exchanges, is the ability to know that you're in a safe space and that there's a freedom to do so without any consequence. Some organizations do that through levels of anonymity. That's why the suggestion box are like, oh yeah, just put down whatever you want. Don't write your name. It's fine. We just care about the suggestions, not even who said that. Sometimes those are scenarios where that's created that way, where they create these anonymous dynamics because they fear blowback or whistleblowing or whatever you want to call it. So yeah, I think that it's really just about feeling as though you have the freedom of your voice, the freedom of your actions in environments where you're trying to enact change.
Yeah, love it. And it's actually really interesting because I think it was Reed Hastings from Netflix. Maybe it was in No Rules Rules, but talked about it. And there's different flips on that. Some it's like, we don't care who does it. Make everybody anonymous so that they do feel that safety. There's no way to know who they are. And the reverse can also be true. It's like, we really want to know who said it, not so they can be punished. And I think it's really important, something you said there that is also part of psychological safety. There are no consequences for your action, obviously within the range of laws and human rights and stuff.
Sure.
But if there are fears of consequences, then that changes the whole game in a very negative way.
You're walking on eggshells.
Without that, all you're going to do is everybody's going to wait till the highest ranking person in the room talks, and everybody's going to agree with them. And then now you've just got an echo chamber, and you've lost the group intelligence almost completely. It's like, what boss said.
Yeah, it's all groupthink. It's nothing is basically, there's no individualism, and inside of that, sometimes there's no creativity because everyone's like, I'd rather just agree and not lose my job.
Yes, exactly. So I'm going to go to the next one, but I love that answer. We're so on the same page about that whole essence. This one is, what are the greatest challenges you face in transforming organizational culture and leadership?
I would say that's a lack of knowledge of the process and of the potential cultures that are involved. And my example to that is our role as a global supply chain solutions provider is to bridge the gap between customers, clients, and the suppliers. And suppliers are oftentimes in other parts of the world. And there are differences in terms of the way that one side of the world wants to act, react, deal with things, professionalism, accountability, timeliness, so forth, and how your customers may want to basically see their products delivered, managed, and so on and so forth. And so what ends up being this challenge, and oftentimes, is being able to be that bridge and connect the dots between both sides to explain to the supplier side, the manufacturing side, the needs, goals, objectives, and manners of which a customer wants their productions managed and facilitated, while at the same time being able to explain to the customers or clients on the other end how the manufacturing process works that goes beyond the actual manufacturing. Meaning, like, they're not going to be around because it's Chinese New Year, or this is going to happen because of the fact that they don't manage in a piece by piece, but they manage random inspection way, or there is a difference in language or culture in terms of trust, or in terms of faith, or in terms of the way that they want to globally operate with you or with us, and so on. So these are things that go beyond just dollars and cents. And oftentimes we as an organization have to play that interim role to connect those parties and do so that both sides can take advantage of the global economy and the opportunities that exist and learn from each other where they can. And even when they can't learn from each other, then we have to be that bridge that just at least resolves it so that there's outcomes that are driven for both sides.
Right. Do you find yourself quite often in your work educating people?
Absolutely. Both sides. And it starts off with a kickoff call on, let's say, the supplier side, where we say, okay, here we are. Let's go through the contract. Let's let you know everything that this client thinks is important. And determine all of the facets on timeframes, defects, the way it's done, communication, blah, 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 blah. So everybody sets the stage because every client is going to be different and every manufacturer is going to be different and the relationship between each other is going to be different. And so we need to manage those scenarios. We have to teach the one side. Then on the other side, we have to teach the customers or brands to say, this is a manufacturer that is like this. They do things in ABC ways. We're going to be there to basically help you through this process and so forth. But these are the things that you could expect. And these are the things that are going to pop up that you may not expect. And that's all okay as well. So it's really about creating this dynamic and balancing act that matters across the board for everybody.
So I actually want to ask you a couple things. I looked at your stuff. Tell us about your supply and demand show.
Sure. Back to this idea of trying to make the supply chain more relatable. I decided to have my own podcast and I brought it on with a friend of mine, Richard Crawford, who is a very well-traveled person and has a award-winning show on Amazon Prime called Leave No Trace, where he travels through the far corners of the world and basically kind of like an Anthony Bourdain meets Bear Grylls, and he just kind of goes to these different parts of the world in searching for ecotourism and where it has the lowest carbon footprint. So Antarctica, he's in Mongolia right now, he's in Cliff of Peru sleeping, he's in Africa with the Maasai, like he's all over the place doing these things. It's a really cool show. Leave No Trace is what it's called. So he's got a global view, but he doesn't know a lot about supply chain, and he's a very entertaining, funny guy. We're good friends. So I said, all right, let's do this sort of two-man show where we bring on different guests and talk about the supply chain as it relates to them. Some people are from the supply chain industry, some people aren't, but are impacted by the supply chain. And in doing so, we can have this sort of really fun 15-minute long show. I think we've done like 60 or 70 episodes already, and it's fun. It's a good way to just, again, get information out. We enjoy doing it. And that's the story of the supply and demand show in a nutshell. And we try to get on and do it a few every month. In the summertime, we tend to slow down a bit, and we have slowed down a little bit, but in general, it's a great show and people seem to like it.
Nice. It's an interesting combination because when you think about supply chain, brings up two things to my mind. And one is the impact of the supply chain, right? It's not going to be a zero carbon footprint endeavor, especially when things are coming from all over the world and something is so cheap somewhere else that they'd rather burn fossil fuels to bring it because they can't compete doing it any other way. So does it ever overlap or merge those things at any point?
Absolutely. I mean, we talk about all of those things, sustainability. I mean, for example, COP28, which was the large like UN sponsored supply chain convention in Dubai 1 or 2 years ago, was all about that, to try to get towards like zero carbon footprint by the year 2050. And the largest shipping carriers were all there. Maersk and Dwell and all these major carriers were there to talk about how that was going to be done and with what kinds of alternative fuel sources and so forth, and pathways and green corridors, between one part of the world and the other part of the world, because shipping and logistics is the 7th leading cause of greenhouse gas on the planet. So it's very high. And so we discuss those things, we look at those things and really try to communicate areas of sustainability, opportunities, unique things that are happening in the global supply chain, whether it's strikes or pandemics or tariffs or whatever it may be. We really try to hit on different topical conversations that are happening and at the same time give a unique perspective with unique guests that can speak to different facets. So we had recently one of the heads of Glenmorangie Scotch. It was all about agricultural supply chain. You need to have the barley and the hops and this, that, and if it's not right, then you can't have an output. And if you can't have an output, then you can't have sales. Reliant on Mother Nature, right? Mother Nature supply chain is very important. We had another person who was on there who was the head of White Desert, which is a group that basically takes people to Antarctica, and how supply chain is essential. It's life or death. If you don't have resources out there in a place where you can't get resources, storm happens or something and planes can't get in and out and you're in the middle of nowhere, you need to be able to protect yourselves and take care of yourselves as human beings in those hostile environments, be able to still survive. So supply chain ends up being life and death. And that was like a unique perspective. And we try to, again, take different areas and different industries and discuss the supply chain as it relates to that. Because if I can talk about how Taylor Swift is a supply chain superhero because of the way that she manages logistics, and every single show across the planet is exactly the same because she transports an entire crew via her planes or her whatever, and nothing ever changes, so that the show is exactly the same, the lighting is exactly the same, the costumes are the same, every single city to city to city, so everyone gets a consistency and quality control. It's supply chain of the entertainment entertainment industry. And that's important too. So you have to think about it in these different, whether it's logistics and supply chain technically. And you have to think about these things. So I try to break it down in different ways that people can understand. Why are our bananas green in this, for example? What's the reasoning behind that? Just different topics. So
yeah, that's interesting. When you were talking about that, I was thinking about something, and I am absolutely 0% religious. I don't believe in any religion. That doesn't mean there isn't wisdom to be gained from religion and religious beliefs. And I think the Buddha was probably one of the smartest and wisest people who ever lived, in that even though I don't think of this at all on a metaphysical level, you can dump the metaphysics altogether, but interconnectedness is just fundamental to the universe. And again, we're not talking the fluffy universe. We're talking the cosmological, the physics, the chemistry, the real scientific universe. When you were talking about, especially when you hit the Arctic thing, it changed my direction. But at first I was thinking of, well, one of the things about supply chain in general is it is by definition interdependent. We are all interdependent. We just don't realize it mostly because supply chains generally work so damn well.
Correct.
I went and got my bread and my banana and used my machine, which was from Cuisinart, but I live here in Japan, and made my own peanut butter. If somebody said, okay, Tim, there's no more peanuts, you're going to have to grow them. Suddenly you get a grasp of how it does impact everybody. So interdependence, but literally humanity, the universe, and the earth. But then as soon as you hit the Arctic thing, it was like, oh, that's a really great analogy, because as you said, it was life and death, but there's this large round blue thing that we call Earth. And it's not like we have an alternative. If we, excuse my French, fuck it up because we're trying to be too greedy, and when you're talking about the shipping and stuff, if we destroy the sustainability, we don't have any alternatives. And Mars might happen someday, but in the meantime, and even from the real experts, it's like, well, this is still the best place to live that we know of. You can go to Mars and live in a cave and barely get by. And of course, now you talk supply chain on hyperdrive.
Intergalactic supply chain.
Yes, that it's even more challenging, but that just like being isolated in the Arctic and having to rely on those supplies, that's also true for the Earth and us as a species. And we really need to get our shit together. And here's where it overlaps with AI. I just finished listening to a book called The Empire of AI, and it talks about the whole approach of using the large language model, that there are different paradigms for how to train AI by being more specific and more precise about the training data itself, rather than, okay, let's go learn everything. It's interesting because it also overlaps with neuroscience, because years ago, my professor and I were talking about this, and he said, well, I think consciousness is a continuum. A planaria worm has very little to no consciousness. A cat has way more than a planaria worm, but not as much as us. But it isn't like it's like conscious. It's probably not a cutoff. And the way our brain works is, I think it's just an emergent property. What we call consciousness is just an emergent property of the level of complex of our brains, right? At some point, or it may be a continuum, but at some point it becomes what we understand as consciousness. And the problem and the approach, as much as it's working, is the resources that it's taking and the lack of accountability of the large AI companies for like taking potable water and using it and not having to bring it out. They should have to at least have it leave as clean or cleaner. Think interface carpets kind of stuff. Leave what comes out of their data centers cleaner than it went in, rather than, well, we have to use this water because otherwise it's going to jam up our cooling system and we're important and who cares about the locals who don't have enough to water their crops. That's the energy demand and everything else that we really have to consider other models, or put exceptionally high levels of accountability on the AI organizations themselves to be solving those problems and making sure they're adding value rather than extracting resources and taking it so they can make billions of dollars, oftentimes on the intellectual property theft of most of the rest of the world. There's some real challenges there, and that really hits on especially the energy thing with the scaling. And the bigger it is, the more energy it needs, the more processors and GPUs you need. It's an interesting thing. So while living in the Arctic is life or death, living on this planet is no less life or death. It's just going to happen more slowly, and we better be grown up about how we do it, or it's totally okay. Humans disappear, the Earth will still be here and it will continue. It's not a question of if the Earth survives, it's a question of if we're a smart enough species not to be dumbasses. Do you know the Great Filter?
No.
So the Great Filter is sort of like, I think it was, sometimes they call it the Fermi paradox. I think that's the same thing. Where it's like, why don't we say aliens everywhere? One of the ideas is, well, maybe species who reach a certain level of advancement destroy themselves. Obviously, the size of space is an issue too. I think there probably are other intelligent species out there, but I can also see we're at a point in history where it's like, you know what? If we are not wise and compassionate and think about things like this interdependence enough, especially those who have the resources, you know, the billionaires and stuff, that I could see how we could filter ourselves out of the ability to ever become intergalactic or multiplanetary.
Yep.
Because we're too busy not managing what we've got well here. And if you start flying around through space, you're going to have to be that much better at those same logistical and resource considerations.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's about resource management for sure on an intergalactic scale. And
Yes.
if we don't pay attention to it and manage it properly, then it will absolutely come to, bite us in the butt. And, the reality of it is that how much do we care in our lifetime? Like, do we care about future generations as much as we care about our own life? And I think the answer for most of us is no. The true answer is no. We're just selfish beings. And because of that, we only do as much as we can. There's a very, 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 very small percentage that would be willing to sacrifice themselves for the benefit and their conveniences and their comfort for the benefit of future generations. So we need to figure out a way that it doesn't feel like an inconvenience to basically save the future generations. That's going to be the secret sauce, the magic. To be like, yeah, it's just as good to do A as to do B. And the added benefit is that my grandkids will still be able to live on this planet. But it has to be that simple that it's A or B and there's no difference between them except one saves future generations and the other one doesn't.
Yeah.
When we get to that level playing field of a decision making, when that happens, then it'll hopefully be a no-brainer,
Yeah.
The only thing that'll stand in the way there will then be like big business or opportunities that are like losing opportunity because of the fact people are shifting from A to B, but I hope we'll get
But you're
there.
right. Everybody wants to have everything, and it's even the same of capitalism. And I am an entrepreneur saying this, but it's like, well, I want to get rich first, and then we'll save the planet and everybody else on it. But if everybody is doing this, it's like the prisoner's dilemmas. Well, I have to screw everybody over so I can win, and then I will become benevolent. And we are at an inflection point, maybe not in our lifetimes, but quite possibly in our lifetimes, where we're going to see that it's going to resolve one way or the other. Because that's where we are, because we can only take resource consumption and the idea of a perpetually growing economy. Is that really, by definition, not just by supply chain, but by resources, is that really sustainable? How can you sustain perpetual growth in a finite system? And I don't think you can. So we have to find a solution which is sustainable rather than growth. So that's industrial revolution thinking. That's no longer sustainable and no longer operable for
it has
more
to
and
be
more
a fully
people.
sustainable loop. It has to basically be like we manufacture things, we use the things, we recycle and upcycle the things, and they go back through the process. And you basically have a zero wastage situation. Kind of like I think about that in terms of water on this planet, right? It rains, it comes down, it turns into oceans, it evaporates, then it goes back up in the clouds, and it comes back down, like the whole entire like water cycle. So it's that way, but it's on manufacturing so that we don't have landfills, so we don't have this, that, the other, What do we do with all of our garbage? We got to burn it or do different things that basically won't cause carbon emissions. Do we vaporize it somehow? Do we create a scenario where it's non-contaminants, but it just goes back to then being dust that we can then use for doing other things that are important? We got to just figure out these things.
And actually, there's been a brilliant solution, and it's far from a new book, but a guy who actually works in or started a company that has a carbonizer. So basically, how you make charcoal is you take some organic matter with carbon in it, you burn it in an oxygen-starved environment, and it carbonizes it, and that actually sequesters carbon really well. And he pointed me to a book, and it's called Burn: Using Fire to Save the Earth. Brilliant book talking about a circular carbon economy. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, brilliant book. And the closest thing to something that we could do today, it's like, well, we take anything with carbon in it, we burn it in this kind of environment, and it sequesters it basically forever if it's like biochar. And it would actually sequestration of anything, because you could go, well, why don't we compost it? Well, till I listened to this book, I hadn't thought about it. When you compost something, you're going to be releasing all the CO2 and all the methane, because that's what decomposition is, back into the atmosphere. So So you're recycling the carbon dioxide, you're not getting rid of it. If you
Right.
biochar it, then it's sequestered. It stays in that biochar. And this guy talks about using it in concrete and making carbon fiber out of biochar. And it's wild. There's no additional technology needed. We just need to do it. Mostly
Yeah.
take all our waste and turn it into biochar to use as a material, or just biochar to bury because it actually is a good soil additive.
Right. And point is that why don't we do it? And the point, and there's where the rub is, because it's not convenient, it's not cost effective, it doesn't really have a benefit that people can see, or whatever it is. All of
Right.
those reasons that are the obstacles towards us actually making such moves or shifts need to be looked at, need to be examined, and need to be removed or subsidized by the governments to then be able to protect citizens. I mean, part of that is also corrupt government who don't
Big
do
time.
things in the best interest of the environment or humanity or society. And this is all the role of government. Very important too.
Yeah, I agree. Innovation and framing, what you were talking about, is like framing. How can we make it desirable based on just giving the right definitions that people are already aligned on? Grandkids. Well, do you want grandkids? It's like, yeah, I do. I want grandkids, or I want my ancestors to do really well. It's like, do you realize we might not have any ancestors? Is it important enough that you're willing to change something now so that humanity continues? But in particular, to make it personal, like in terms of a good frame, that your kids are able to have kids and their kids are able to have kids. Now it's literally at home. So a combination of innovation and framing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a very good conversation we had today.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. So let's end with this one thing. Is there anything else that we've left unsaid or that you would sort of like to say to the audience?
Sure, sure. We live on this planet once. You really need to work to make an impact in the things that you do and pursue those opportunities that you care the most about. We are all one species, one humanity. We need to live more as global citizens with each other, because that's the true way to really connect all of us together across the planet in good times and in bad times. And so I think that that's very, very important. And I try to do that in my daily life, and then obviously also in my work in global supply chain. If you would like to learn more about my philosophy and leadership and the things that I talk about, my website is kerimkfuri.com. Or for any supply chain needs or issues, challenges you may face, or opportunities, it's theatlasnetwork.com. And outside of that, I have a book which is supplychainupsanddowns.com. And that's pretty much about me. Anything else you want to know is all on social media. Just look me up under Kerim Kfuri and you can get a sense of the things that I'm doing.
Great. Thank you, Kerim.